Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Keep the Line Moving, the podcast designed to talk about leadership, life, and inspiration. I'm your host, Curt Gargano, and for episode 97, we are talking about leading by example. Our guest, Curt Gowdy Jr., had a wonderful example with his father, Curt Gowdy, the Sports Broadcasting Hall of Famer. That's right, Curt Gowdy Jr. had quite a career. He saw in his father a tremendous work ethic and a commitment to the craft, exactly what propelled Curt into a wonderful career himself, spanning over 46 years, earning him 16 national and 27 regional Emmy Awards. He spent 29 years at ABC's Wide World of Sports. He started the regional sports network, SNY, where he was the senior vice president of production and executive producer. He mentored broadcasters like Gary Cohen, Keith Hernandez, Ron Darling, Kevin Burkhardt, who's the #1 Fox play-by-play broadcaster paired up with Tom Brady. So much to talk about, including where was Curt in Game 3 of the 1989 Battle of the Bay between the Giants and the Oakland Athletics at Candlestick Park during the earthquake? Well, he was in the production truck, and he will take us behind the scenes. You don't want to miss these stories and this career from the great Curt Gowdy Jr., our guest this week on Keep the Line Moving. All right, Curt, great to see you. I'm so glad we're doing this. It's been 2 years since you retired with a great career, ABC, SNY, spanning over decades. What was the decision like? I can assume it was bittersweet.
It was. Steve Rabb has become a very close friend over the years, and in particularly when I decided to retire, Steve and I would go through our yearly reviews in February at spring training, and in 20 during the COVID time, we were down there, and he said, "How much longer do you want to keep working?" He goes, and he was great about this. He goes, "I want you to work as long as you want to work." And I said, "I would like to do 2 more years, and I think I would be ready to move off to doing more personal things that I've been wanting to do for a few years." And so he was most gracious during my time there, and particularly during the last month or two when I was at SNY. But I left a lot of great memories.
All right, Curt, you were at SNY from the very beginning. You started the network, you and others, of course. It was the marquee national sports network. I remember being in the Bay Area thinking someday I'm going to visit them and see how they're doing this. They had so much gravitas. You had so much gravitas. Why do you think that is? I understand big market, New York, but you had so much notoriety and respect in the industry.
Well, I think, first of all, Fred Wilpon, Saul Katz, and the ownership group, Jeff Wilpon, were extremely supportive. When I met Fred for the first time in the interview process with John Littner, who was the first president at SNY who hired me, and John and I go way back to our days at ABC, Fred said, "Look, we know that we have a major league team, the New York Mets, that we are going to be broadcasting all their games, home and away, and spring training games, and all the shoulder programming that goes along with it. We know that we're going to have a studio operation to do pre and post game shows, to do other shows for basketball, Big East, football, and UConn." And Fred said, "It's like church and state. Just be honest, back it up with the facts. You can be critical, but don't be mean-spirited, and, pat the guys on the back or the gals when they deserve it. And if you have to call them out, you call them out." And I think that philosophy, and everybody in New York was waiting for us to become just a homer network for every broadcast that we put on, whether it was the Mets, the Jets, UConn, or Big East. And that leadership at the top, that was our directive. And it was a great opportunity for all of us who came in there. And it was a small group when we got all together to launch the net prior to the launch in 2005. when John hired me.
So, Curt, when you look back at what you were doing, you had to communicate with stakeholders, everyone, your boss, the producers, the talent, leadership, and you had to say, okay, here's how we're going to do this. How much of your experience in doing that do you credit to your dad and the upbringing that you had watching this top Hall of Fame broadcaster do baseball, wide world of sports, Super Bowls, the 75 World Series? I can go on and on. How much did his credibility and the way he worked, his methodology as a broadcaster, help you frame the way you were going to approach your role as a senior producer? Because you had a front row seat to watching your dad work.
It's a very good question because growing up, I was just an incredible television fan of sports. I mean, I would sit there when he was doing the AFL games in the 60s and I was 10 years old. I'd sit there and watch a doubleheader on a Sunday afternoon before we went out and played, any sports in late in the afternoon. My dad just had a great way about painting a picture of the game, never being bigger than the game, and making sure that he was exceptionally prepared, knew all the facts, knew all the rules in any sport. I mean, he was the guy for football, for basketball, for baseball. Today, it's very different. I learned a lot from him on that. He was a great mentor to me. He never really pushed me into sports at all. I just love sports. And he said, you'll find your way. You're going to find something that you love to do. And when you find that, you're going to be great at it. You're going to love to do it. And he was right. So I credit that with the ability to me to then communicate during all the days in my career, especially dealing with talent. When you grow up with talent, and my dad's been in, I don't know, he's in 21 Hall of Fames. So I learned a lot dealing with talent, just watching him. And that gave me a real heads up, especially when I was dealing with talent at big events at ABC Sports, and then hiring and creating and guiding and leading talent when I went to SNY in 2005.
So, Curt, you're using an interesting term in saying dealing with talent. Now, we're talking about broadcasters. We're talking about various levels of broadcasters, experience-wise, right? What do you mean when you say that? And as you know, I'm taking offense to this because I was talent for the first 12 years of my career. So I understand what being dealt with means. But how do you communicate with them? All kidding aside, how would you craft your message to them in preparing for a big game or production meetings or just chatting with them? Because we all are people, right? And we all need to be communicated with effectively.
Yeah. And you just said it. We're all just people and they're all different. And the amount of talent that I've been blessed to be associated with at my network days with some of the greats in the business, Al Michaels, Jim McKay, Howard Cosell to a lesser extent, Frank Gifford, all those guys. I was a young producer and I had to learn quickly to really be a leadership, really showcase leadership skills to them, being honest and direct in my communication. And you had to treat each of them differently because they're all different individuals. And then when SNY came about, I had to hire a fairly large group of studio men and women, and the same on the remote side, whether there was with the New York Mets, the Jets, UConn basketball, and or Big East football and basketball. So you deal with each talent differently because they all are different. And I did a lot of mentoring and teaching, particularly when I came to the launch of SNY. I had to. We had to start from scratch. We had a philosophy that we were going to be true to our word, that we were going to not be overly critical, but we're going to be positive. But we're going to give the facts, and we're not going to shy away from criticizing when it's due. Just be fair. And that was our philosophy. And I think that as you meet and hire talent along the way, which I did, you want to teach them. You also need to make sure that you inspire them to take risks, educated risk, to share in the communication process. It's a two-way street. I mean, I can display all of the direct communication to them, but I want that feedback back as well from them. You know, having that direct, honest feedback to talent in particular is really important because they need to grow.
So you said mentoring and teaching, and I lit up, and here's why. Because I have firsthand knowledge of this. You and I were in several meetings together over the years. You with SNY, myself at the New York Jets, and we had collaborations, initiatives, broadcasting deals, or storytelling, whatever the case may be. And you would always come at it in a very productive and helpful manner. You always said something of value that moved us all forward. So my question is, how did you do that with young broadcasters and producers? Because listen, egos get involved in professional sports and high production value broadcasting, right? Egos get involved in front of the camera, behind the camera. And you always had to deal with that. How did you do that? And Kevin Burkhardt is a great example. Look what he's doing now. He's the #1 Fox team with Tom Brady. How did you take care of talent and teach and mentor? How did you approach that in an overall way?
It's very different, you know, on the national level. All those the talent that I was blessed to work with and produce were very, very highly successful, seasoned veterans. Jim McKay, it's like a second father to me. Al Michaels, Howard Cosell, Frank Gifford, Leslie Visser, Terry Gannon. The list just goes on, and all of those individuals were different, and it was more about leading them and giving them feedback, honest feedback, than mentoring and teaching, because those men and women were very established at that time in my career. When we launched SNY and had to hire a lot of different men and women, both in studio and on the remote side, you had to start from scratch. They had to understand what the philosophy of the network was, which we've talked about. Then you have to make sure that they are getting the wisdom that I have, that I could provide them, to give them really good feedback. And that was a lot of just, you know, sitting down and screening with talent. And it's not just talent, it's producers and directors, it's everybody. So you look at the body of work, you critique it, but not in a really critical way, because you have to have that delicate balance of not making them, meaning the talent, feel underwhelming about themselves. Point out the great things, point out the things that they're doing really well. Here are the things that we need to work on. And it could be as simple as how they articulate going to a break, teasing the next segment. So everybody is different. Everybody has a different ego. But I think I've always prided myself in making sure that I wanted to teach as much as I could. I wanted to mentor as much as I could, because I had a lot of experience, and I was really fortunate to be in the business as long as I was.
All right, Curt, as I said in your intro, this is the 35th anniversary of the World Series earthquake game between the San Francisco Giants and the Oakland Athletics at Candlestick Park, October 17th, 1989. The earthquake game. You were at that game. I was supposed to be at that game, but as a college student, I stayed behind and studied for finals. A lot of my roommates were surprised at that. I don't blame them. Anyway, take us behind the scenes. Joe Morgan, Willie Mays on the field, getting ready to do the interview in the booth with McCarver and Al Michaels. Take us behind the scenes at 5:04 West Coast time.
We come on the air at 5 o'clock, and it was Al Michaels, Jim Palmer, and Tim McCarver up in the booth. Great broadcast team. And Joe Morgan was settling down on the first base side, and around 5:02, here comes Willie Mays into the picture from our low first camera. Al was going through some highlights of game 2, and then as we approached throwing it down to Joe Morgan, I looked up at the clock. It was 5:04, and suddenly we have all this static going on in the truck, and we feel the truck moving forward. It sounded like there was a subway going right underneath the truck. I had never been in an earthquake before. And Al Michaels, at that moment, he said, I think we're having an earth. And we went off the air and went to a slide. And eventually we came back on the air. And we then had to put our news hats on because ABC News, it was a national story. There was a lot that a lot of people didn't know about what was going on, especially in the stadium, because in stadium, it was still light out. It was 5:05, 5:10, once everybody sort of got themselves back together again to figure out what was going on. You know, all of our cameras were dead, but we still had the blimp. And the blimp was being sent down through our satellite signal. And we were able to start showing pictures of the Bay Bridge, 880. Downtown, there were fires. And the people in the stadium were just saying, play ball, play ball. And I went down to the commissioner's box and said, here's what we're seeing. Here's what's going on. They immediately postponed the game and postponed the series for well over a week. I think it was 10 days. And the master of different hats, Al Michaels, went from being a sports broadcaster to being a news broadcaster. And we came back on with Nightline and World News and started doing all the reports live from there. We rigged together one camera. He came down to the truck. We borrowed the generator from ESPN. We were on shore power, meaning the power of the stadium that went out. But ESPN was kind enough to give us their generator, gas powered generator, and we went back on the air. And Al grew up in the Bay Area, so he was very familiar and had gone through earthquakes before. And the brilliance of Al Michaels at that point was something that I marveled, because he just segued right to a breaking national news story that had some catastrophic situations connected to it. And we were on the air, I think, until 3 or 4 in the morning. We resumed the series, the earthquake series. It was over in 4 games, but it was a moment that I'll never forget. And the teamwork that was associated with getting us back on the air was unparalleled, and it was extraordinary. The leadership of everybody in their key positions to get us back on the air.
Is that what you take away from that, witnessing that great leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I had to lead. Jeff Mason, our executive producer, he immediately was on with news. What can we do for you? We're going to try to get the generator going from ESPN. I had to lead my production team. The engineers had to figure out how we were going to get Al back on camera again, how we were going to get the audio working. Everybody had to do their job. It was like a big, Ferris wheel. There couldn't have been a broken wheel in that whole Ferris wheel. Everybody had to do their job and be responsible for what they were responsible for. And it was extraordinary to be around.
Is that your singular biggest moment when you think back on your career? If not, what would be?
I think that's tough to beat, because a sporting event is never in the history of sports, of World Series certainly, has ever been interrupted because of an earthquake. There were a lot of different little other moments, like when I was 26 years old, in the 1980 Winter Olympics in Lake Placid, I produced my dad at the luge, and that was, to me, it was sort of the culmination of growing up underneath him and him mentoring me, and then producing him at the Winter Olympics when I was just a young producer. I produced him at the Cheyenne Frontier Days Rodeo. I had really fond memories of the Little League World Series, because all my kids sort of grew up there in the summer. You'd go down there for 2 weeks at the end of August. I remember we were in Detroit at the U.S. Figure Skating Championships, producing that leading up to the Olympic Games that year. And the Nancy Kerrigan incident backstage. And everybody was hands on deck. And we went on the next night in prime time, Thursday night. I'll never forget, Jimmy Roberts was our sideline reporter. and we led with the chief of police of the city to give us the latest update on where they were in terms of finding the assailant who assaulted Nancy Kerrigan backstage with a weapon. So those amongst many, but every event had great memories. I was just a really lucky guy that I worked really hard at what I did when I was a young guy, and I was given great opportunities by men like Chuck Howard and Denny Lewin at ABC and Dennis Swanson at ABC, and then certainly by Fred Wilpon, John Littner, and Steve Rabb. When I transferred to the Challenge of SNY back in 2005.
I love these stories. I could listen to them all day. Did you ever consider doing what your dad did exactly, like being on the air? Why do you think you gravitated towards production and behind the scenes?
Well, I did consider it, and I did for a very short time do radio news reporting and anchoring. My dad had a small little daytime station up in Lawrence, Massachusetts. And in the summers when I was in college, I was able to do some of the newscast and going out and reporting on the local stories at town hall, etc. And I was okay at it, but I just knew that I could never fill his shoes. And it'd always be compared to him. My philosophy was to really carve my own niche. And that's what led me into production.
There are so many people that have learned and been inspired by you, like the great things you're saying about your mentors and people that gave you a chance that you looked at for guidance in your career. Can you imagine the amount of people that are saying the same things about you and giving you credit for what you did for them? It's really amazing.
Well, thank you. But that was my job. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't do that, because I always said that, particularly at a regional sports network, we weren't going to be able to keep everybody there all the time for the rest of their careers. And I think that there have been a lot of talent at SNY that have gone on to national networks, national cable networks. And, I was talking to Kevin Burkhardt not too long ago. And, Kevin has risen to the #1 Fox play-by-play football talent, and he hosts their postseason World Series. Couldn't be more proud of him and all the other men and women that have actually gone on from SNY to make their mark.
All right, Curt, here we go. All-star moments. First thought, best thought. Here are the questions. Number 1, how do you deal with adversity?
I tackle it. I look for the positives. I figure out how to be better and how to overcome it.
Okay, how do you give yourself fuel?
I'm very competitive, and I challenge myself. Always have challenged myself. And I think I learned at a very early age when I first got into the networks that I wanted to outwork everybody, and that's what I needed to do.
Okay, Curt, never give up. What does that mean to you?
Never give up on anything. The great late Jimmy V, never give up, never, ever give up. And I think it's such a great statement in life. If you give up on things, life is sort of meaningless. Even if you find it as this enormous challenge, don't give up on it. Give it your very best.
Curt, the value of collaboration is what?
Oh, it's so important. I could never have achieved the wonderful things in my career without collaboration with talent, with programming, with engineering, with production people, and with our partners. Like when we did business when you were with the Jets, and how we did business with all of our partners and vendors over my career and your career as well.
Hiring people, you've done a lot of that over the years. What do you look for in an ideal candidate to work with you?
I always look for people that were well educated, and you didn't have to go to, when I say well educated, they were just, they took their education wherever they went seriously. And when you hire smart people, it makes a big difference because you're able to teach them and mentor them at an accelerated pace. And then, of course, in our business where it's live television, you have to be calm under the pressure. You have to be able to make decisions instantaneously. And even when you're making those decisions instantaneously, that's a leadership quality for someone who's, quote, in the truck or in the studio, that has seconds to make a decision about what's going to work next when something has just failed, meaning the guest didn't show up for the interview. The picture just went black. Where are we going? And, being able to lead like that and being able to turn and pivot on a dime was, I always look for in people. And I had to learn all those things too.
How would you describe yourself as a leader in one sentence?
I always wanted to set the example for the crew, the team, the network that I was working and working for. I had a major emphasis on hard work, preparation, commitment, and punctuality.
Curt, it was great having you on. I always love visiting with you. It brought back a lot of memories. I wish you nothing but the best.
Chris, as always, I'm happy where you are right now in your new direction. I know you're going to do great, and thank you for having me on.
And we thank Curt very much for being on the show. I have several takeaways from this conversation, which I hope you enjoyed very much. And I'm just going to read them all because there's so many. Set the example. We talked about that in the intro, right? Lead by example. And Curt had so much advice for people coming up in broadcasting, of course, but it applies to any industry, like he said, corporate or otherwise. Hard work, punctuality, preparation, and commitment to your craft. He also emphasized the teaching and mentoring that you can do as you gain experience in your career. And this is something that I think should be underscored, highlighted, and shared with you right now. Remaining calm under pressure. Again, a very transferable skill from TV and the trucks there behind the scenes, and getting all that pressure and having to deal with it appropriately so you can communicate to all stakeholders. Well, take what I just said and what Curt just said in the conversation, and it applies to anything that we are doing in any industry. I am so appreciative of Curt Gowdy Jr. coming on the podcast this week, and I'm appreciative of you. Thank you for subscribing, following. If you haven't, please do so. Rate the podcast, recommend it to your family, friends, and coworkers. You know we appreciate it. We are approaching our 100th episode. Can't wait. Everybody, thank you. Have a great week. We'll see you next time. Every week, you hear guests on this podcast talk about some of their biggest leadership challenges. As a leader, you want to make an impact on those you lead and reach your organization's goals, while also optimizing your time management. Wherever you are in your leadership journey, we could all use some help. This is what we focus on with our group and individual coaching services. To book a call or get more information, email me directly at chrisg@garganoleadership.com or visit our website at garganoleadership.com. For our podcast and video producer, Jack Radutsky, and our marketing coordinator, Savin Narwal, have a great week, everybody.